Deputy Speaker. You know, in the 2.5 years I've been in this place, I've learned good government policy is created collaboratively, while poor policy is developed for others through a top-down approach that does not involve those who stand to be most affected. Policy developed this way is frequently a recipe for disaster, as unintended consequences swamp a good intention. And I fear that's exactly what we see in this Online Safety Act, Social Media Minimum Age Bill 2024, a piece of legislation that may be well-intentioned but ultimately fails to deliver on its promise. Rather than take my word for it, I want to share with you the words of one of my youth forum participants. He compared this ban to a mayor of a city who, in response to a high rate of car crashes, decides to simply ban cars, rather than fix the potholes, make seatbelt laws or provide more driver education. In his exact words, he said, "While that probably sounds silly, to young people like me, the government's plan to ban media for under 16 applies the same logic, doesn't fix anything, and it fails to recognise the benefits of social media for my generation." With those words ringing in my ears, then, I stand today to put forward a contention that the policy that the government is moving appears to be more about quick political wins rather than doing something meaningful for our kids. They're not fixing the potholes, they're just telling our kids there won't be any cars. In pushing this legislation, the government has shown it's not prepared to listen to the voices of countless human rights groups and mental health experts who are concerned that a social media ban will not only be ineffective, but it'll be harmful to many young people. They're also indicating they do not care that this reform threatens to stop young people accessing much-needed mental health services and information and isolate them from social communities, all whilst driving them towards less regulated services. Perhaps even more gallingly, the legislation relies on the promise of an age assurance that would be unenforceable and could require all users, including adults, to share highly confidential private information with platforms. Whilst this legislation claims to be about protecting young Australians, it doesn't hold platforms to account to make their systems or their content safer for younger people. It's not just the contents of this bill that are problematic, however. My community of North Sydney are equally frustrated by the government's determination to rush this legislation through Parliament without proper scrutiny, particularly as this idea of a social media ban for under 16s was originally a thought bubble offered by the Prime Minister during a press conference where he was being peppered with criticism on why we're seeing inaction around the legislation of a ban on gambling advertising. So while this legislation was rushed into the House last Thursday, referred to a one-day Senate inquiry and will be pushed through the Senate this week, the gambling reform legislation is still nowhere to be seen. Insultingly, those who wished to make a submission to the inquiry were given just 24 hours and a 2-page limit. And despite this, media reports today suggest over 15,000 submissions were received. But with just 3 hours to hear the evidence, even if just 1% of the people who submitted were invited to give that evidence, they would have just 2 minutes to speak. That's not a proper inquiry, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's a tick and flick. The whole process around this legislation is disrespectful to the community and experts in this space, and with more Australians than ever saying they do not trust our government, processes like this will not help. Trust is restored when you earn it, by enabling transparency, deliberation and due process, all ideals from which the basis of a healthy democracy stems. To the bill itself, then, this bill sets a minimum age of 16 for social media users. It defines an age-restricted social media platform as one where a significant purpose of the service is to enable online social interaction between 2 or more users, where users can link to or interact with other users, and where the service allows users to post material. The bill gives the Minister the power to create additional conditions that could narrow the definition of an age-restricted social media platform, and the government has proposed using this power to exclude services such as WhatsApp, YouTube, certain educational and mental health services and online gambling services. Yet the reasons these platforms are exempt are opaque. The bill establishes an obligation for providers to take reasonable steps to prevent under 16s from holding an account, with platforms expected to introduce systems and processes to meet that standard, while the Safety Commissioner will be given powers to obtain information about compliance, with penalties of up to $49.5 million for non-compliance. The ban will commence no sooner than 12 months from royal assent, while the government continues to fund an age assurance technologies trial. The bill aims to prohibit platforms from using information collected for age assurance from any other purpose, and finally it will be subject to an independent review within 2 years of the ban taking effect to consider necessary changes. As a mum of 3 young adults, Deputy Speaker, I'm very aware of the negative impacts of social media and the challenges of parenting in this digital world. I also, however, recognise my children are digital natives and are very literate about how these platforms work. For this reason, I encourage everyone involved in this debate to ensure they are listening to the voices of young Australians when it comes to this decision-making process, rather than assuming that the grown-ups in the room know best. Prevention United's recent news survey found that young Australians rated fears about the future and cost of living as the largest negative influences on their mental health, while social media was only ranked 12 out of 20 factors evaluated. For this reason, I fear we are grabbing at this as a simple answer to a challenge that is far more complicated. After all, young people understand the good and the bad of social media better than anyone. Surely the issue here is not that social media as a whole is harmful, but these tools are designed to be addictive and young people can be exposed to inappropriate content. If we want to solve that issue, then we need to do more than just impose an age ban. Ultimately, the addictive nature of social media platforms, coupled with the fact there's no regulation governing their content, means inappropriate content, harmful body images and mis and disinformation will still be dished up, whether someone accesses that platform when they're 14 or 17. We also can't ignore the fact that social media is being used by young people in positive ways, including to help them find community around shared interests or problems and fostering belonging. In fact, a recent study by the Black Dog Institute found these platforms offer adolescents opportunities to enhance well-being by strengthening existing relationships and reducing loneliness. Crucially, social media is also increasingly being used as a gateway to access mental health services and information, with research conducted by Reach Out finding that nearly half of their youth service users access their services via social media, while the same number of young people use social media as a substitute for professional support. In this context, I can understand why many from the mental health sector are alarmed by the proposed ban. The truth is the demand for these types of services already far outstrips supply, and closing an important substitute pathway could be disastrous. As the bill's own explanatory memorandum says, young people vary substantially in how they use social media. I ask them, why is the government introducing such a blunt instrument that fails to differentiate between positive or problematic uses of social media? It's difficult to see this bill as anything other than avoiding dealing with the problems of social media head-on, as it ultimately fails to hold platforms accountable for their online environments. Separately, the government has announced plans to develop a duty of care framework to keep users safe, prevent online harm and hold platforms accountable.